Hi, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me with this mic, so I'm gonna just give you guys a second to gather, I guess. Um, Apparently, I can't record on my phone until I have 1,000 subscribers, which is ridiculous, but I guess it's just something I'll have to deal with. I know I'm just talking to absolutely like nobody right now, but those of you who come later to watch this will watch it. I'm just posting the link to Twitter, and then we can start talking about the matter at hand. Um, I wonder if this mic is working at all. It looks like it's picking up something. I just hope it's clear. Um, so, normally I don't do videos like this. I don't live stream very often. The last few times I live streamed were about my Islamica videos. But I have been angry for almost 48 hours. I have been so angry at the fact that someone can defend something as absolutely horrendous as slavery. Um, and I wanted to talk about it. And I want to say that I normally do not get this perturbed by things people say because I understand ignorance and I understand how some people are. But unfortunately, this is one of those things that I just can't abide. I can't stand. And I have to talk about it. I absolutely have to, address this. The second thing I don't usually do is look up evidence and, because that feels like a waste of my time if people aren't going to buy what I'm saying. But I had to do some research for this because it wasn't within my prerogative, I guess, to study slavery while I was a Muslim because it did not apply to me at all. I was more interested in the faith aspects of Islam rather than the procurement and the treatment of slaves. So we'll look into that in a more secondary way. But right now, I just wanted to address some of the claims that have been made in terms of enslaving people and some points that select users on Twitter have made, stating that it's okay to have slaves, or it was at any point okay to have slaves. Please excuse my hair; it's doing whatever it wants. And yes, I am wearing the same shirt as yesterday. Sue me. So what is a slave? Because I feel like some people don't really fully understand what a slave is. They seem to be under this impression that it's just this like cushy job that you don't need to be paid for and you get benefits from, like having a shelter and being fed. I've heard that comparison made too many times yesterday and today, and I just want to clear that up for you, that it is not like having a domestic job where you just come into someone's house and clean for them. It is the same. It is not even comparable. A slave, according to the dictionary, is the condition in which another is in the condition in which one person is owned by another and is under the owner's control, especially in voluntary servitude. And this can range in many different ways. There are many different types of slaves. Something that the world has very recently seen is plantations, cotton pickers, sugar plantations, stuff like that, and people working that kind of hard labor. Obviously, you have domestic slaves who take care of the house. You have bookkeeping slaves who know how to read and write. In ancient times, you had gladiators who were slaves. You had janissaries who were also slaves. You had eunuchs who were slaves. You had all kinds of slaves. But one thing that they all had in common was that their autonomy was completely stripped. They had no agency to make choices for themselves. They had no freedoms that they could express for themselves. They were under the servitude of their masters wholly and completely. And that is what it meant to be a slave. And how were slaves procured? In some ancient societies, invasions were undertaken. So one community would invade another community, and the survivors of the community that was invaded would then be taken in as slaves. In another way is through barter or through sales. So slaves that were procured through invasion were then sold off. Slightly more uncommon instances of slavery have also come about where people are very poor and sell themselves into slavery. in order to have meal and board, because those rich households wanted slaves, and those people had agreed to become slaves. Another example of slavery is when someone has a debt to pay, and they, instead of paying the debt, they work that debt off through slavery. And that's not, those last two examples are not the kind of slavery we're going to be talking about. We are going to be talking about the people whose lands are invaded and then they are procured as slaves, as a result of their land being invaded and those people being the survivors, because we are specifically talking about slavery in Islam. And when we're talking about slavery in Islam, we are talking about slaves who originally were prisoners of war, and we are also talking about slaves who were bought and sold. We are it's very unlikely that in an Islamic setting, especially at the time of the Prophet and the companions, whom I will be referring to as the Sahaba because that's the Arabic word for companions, it was very, very unlikely that you would have instances of poverty to a degree where people were selling themselves into slavery, or to a degree where, you know, someone had a debt and they decided to become a slave in order to work off that debt. It's not as common in those times as people losing battles and then becoming slaves as a result of that, or being sold into slavery. Now, some of the claims that have been made about slaves, which are really shocking in 2019, and I posted a thread about this, like, I can't believe in this day and age I have to tell somebody that slavery is wrong. It baffles me that that is the case, and I hate it. It's disgusting. I don't know how to even really wrap my head around that. Like, how do you wake up every day in the morning and are so out of touch that you don't understand that slavery is wrong? You know, how do you wake up, have your cereal, go into work, come home, you know, love your family, kiss your wife goodbye, fucking hug your kids? You know, how do you do that and then also think that slavery is fine? I don't understand how you can live like that. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I would like to address some of the points that were made in defense of essentially owning slaves. So the whole thing that sparked this argument between me and this person, whose name is Zaim, and I will be at points of this, because I'm more or less ranting, I will be referring to Zaim directly. The first thing he said that really started this argument was, nothing is crappy about owning a slave at a time where slavery was rampant, provided that you treated him in a respectful way. You know what's respectful, Zaim, of another human being is that you don't own them wholly and completely. That is what is respectful of a human being. You are literally justifying slavery because slavery was rampant. That there are so many things that were rampant in the past that are no longer, you know, rampant, that will always be immoral. And I gave the example of pillaging, of raping, of murdering people, right? And he was like, oh, those things were always immoral because nobody appreciated those acts, which, you know, is arguable, but I'm not even going to get into that. Okay, I'm going to ignore the fact that that guy just called me a cousin-made freak. Omar, you can shut the fuck up and you can leave. But also, we're continuing. Slavery wasn't always wrong and therefore was not immoral. Slavery is always wrong. The reason that slavery is always wrong is because we have general guidelines. I don't know if I should just pop out the chat, to be honest. So why is slavery wrong, in my opinion, from a religious perspective, right? God gives you free will. In Islam, there is something we call free will. People have the agency to make choices in their life. God gives you free will. And I'm not specifically referring to Islam because in Islam, slavery is halal. But if I was a religious person, if I believed in God, and if I believed that God gave us agency to make our own choices, what right do I have to take away someone else's agency, to own that person? How would you how can you, as a believer in God who believes that God gave you a free will, take away someone else's free will? How can you do that? How can you stand to do that? And like, to say that slavery is not immoral is like saying controlling another human being is not immoral when it truly is. You are fighting on the side of slavers who procured people, who invaded lands and stole those people away, who murdered their family members, who murdered their entire villages, their entire tribes, who went into that land, killed most of the people, and you are the survivor. You already have that survivor's guilt on your side, right? You already have that going on. And then this person who invaded your land is going to take you and make you serve them. If you're a girl, it's even worse because you become a concubine. You become a sex slave, right? And you're going to tell me that that was never immoral? And alongside that, Zaim kept saying repeatedly that the procurement of slaves has nothing to do with slavery. Yes, it does, because the way that you procure slaves in Islam is by invading a land and collecting the remaining people and keeping them as slaves. And it's just ridiculous that you would say that that has nothing to do with slavery when, slaves don't just pop out of nowhere. You can't just grow them out of the ground. They come from somewhere. They have history. There's a way of getting them. Omar, shut the fuck up. We fucking hate you. If you don't want to be here, get the fuck out of the chat, okay? Get the fuck out. We don't want you here. Anyways, getting back. Some slaves loved their masters and died for them, protected them. And Zaim considers that the majority of slaves, that some slaves, not just some slaves, the majority of slaves loved their masters. Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of understanding of how to understand historical sources. I will answer your questions later. Please keep your questions, for the end. Some slaves loved their masters, and Zaim is coming from a place of saying that there are sources, historical sources, that say that some slaves died for their masters, some slaves loved their masters, some slaves, protected their masters. Okay, I'm not denying that, okay? But in no way is that a majority. There have been millions of slaves in human history, and in no way is that a majority. Otherwise, there'd be thousands of more reports about that. Secondly, the way that historical sources work, you get primary sources, which are like diary entries, letters, firsthand people writing firsthand accounts, right? And then you have secondary sources where someone who comes in a much later time writes these things, like biographers and historians and things like that. Tell me in what world a master would allow a slave to tell a bad story about him. It is literally like saying that those children of abuse or people who have faced abuse in their life from their lovers, from their parents, from family members, from whoever, those people who have Stockholm syndrome and still love those people who abuse them are that justifies abuse. And something that Zaim kept telling me was that abuse is not comparable to slavery because nobody loves their abuser, which is simply not true, because abuse is very, very complex in that many people who face it don't always know how to feel about the abuse. And for many, many years, for even up until today, there are people who believe that abuse is fine as long as it's used for discipline. So, we have that point about, it's accepted in some communities, and before it was accepted in most communities, that you could abuse someone in order to control them and discipline them. So does that suddenly make the abuse okay? Of course it doesn't, because it's a terrible thing to do. But you are somehow justifying slavery because a minority, it has never been a majority. I don't know where he got the idea that the majority of slaves loved being slaves. It is a tiny minority that may have enjoyed, their time as slaves. The second thing I want to say about that is just because that person didn't have a terrible time being a slave does not mean that slavery is somehow correct. Someone who is born without freedom, who has only known slavery, they're going to make the best out of a bad situation. If their master was good to them, of course they're going to say that their master was good to them. That doesn't change the fact that that man owned that person, and that person was still under that, under that huge umbrella of being controlled by another human being completely and totally. It doesn't negate that fact. It's ridiculous to me that you would say just because the person who is being abused, essentially, because their freedoms are completely taken away, the person who is being abused, it's okay for them to face that abuse because they're the people who are abusing them by taking away their freedom is being nice to them. It's not good enough. It's simply not an argument. It's still a terrible thing to do to a human being. The third point is that if slaves didn't like being slaves, they could just run away, which is just like, it shows you how far removed that this person is from understanding what slavery is. They cannot run away from slavery because they are a slave. They are not on the same level as free people because that's how slaves work. They can't just run away because the person who owns that slave owns that human being. If they run away, they can be punished. In case you are unaware, within the last 150 years where we still had slaves in the world, people who were slaves who ran away from their plantations, ran away from their masters, were lynched or brought back and severely punished for running away. It is in the same way that when you have a piece of technology that you own, it is the same way if you have a piece of technology that you own and it, breaks down or it becomes useless, it is the same way that the slaves were treated. They were punished, they were, killed, whatever. They were treated like something that was beneath a human being. They were not treated like human beings, even though they were human beings. The next thing that Zaim said is that slaves would benefit from slavery. Now, in the instances where we talked about different types of slaves and how some slaves would sell themselves to rich people in order to gain food and, a shelter, yes, that could be applicable. However, in the context of where a slave is being taken away from their homes, where people are being killed, their families and their villages and their communities are being destroyed, and then they're taken into slavery, how is that beneficial to the slave? How is that in any way beneficial to the slave? How? I don't, explain it to me. That is not beneficial to them. You've literally uprooted them from their families, from their communities, from their societies. You have completely removed them from their normal place of being, from their normal place of peace, and you have put them in the homes of the people who have destroyed their lives. How is that beneficial to the slave? Because they get some free food and some clothes and some shelter, and then they're treated like second-class citizens because they are second-class citizens? That's the benefit of being a slave? Are you... Next point, slavery is not directly related to the treatment of sorry, I already addressed that point about how slaves were procured and how Zaim kept saying that the treatment of slaves and slaving were not related. The next thing that I wanted to say is that people like this, who talk about slavery in this way where they're so far removed from reality, will be the first people to complain about colonialism and the things that the white man has done. They'll be the first people to talk about colonialism. And I don't understand it, because how do you think people got slaves? Slaves didn't just walk up to you and were like, here we are, we're here to serve you. It was through invasion, it was through colonialism that slaves were procured. So I don't understand how you're opposed to colonialism, but also you're pro-slavery. it doesn't matter, and it doesn't make any sense to me. And also the fact that you are a colored person talking about slavery in this way, defending slavers instead of in any way being sensitive to the plight of millions on millions of slaves. Like it makes no sense to me that you would do that. And you kept saying that slavery is no longer valid in this day and age. Slavery was only abolished in the last 100 to 150 years. It was very recently abolished. And by your definition, Zaim, specifically, I don't know about anybody else, by your definition, Zaim, you have said that because it was rampant, it was okay. It was rampant up until 100 to 150 years ago. So why is it suddenly not okay? Because it's been abolished in most countries? Is that why? Because I thought Islam was supposed to be this religion for all time. So explain to me why you, by your, if you've got a revelation from God, please tell him to call me, because I've been trying to contact him for fucking years. But like, why is it suddenly not okay now? Like, why is it immoral now, but it wasn't immoral 150 years ago? Explain. The other thing that that we were told is that slaves could buy their freedom back, and this is true. But why should they have to buy their freedom back? Why is slavery enabled in this way that slaves who want to be free have to buy their freedom back? And also, there is no set price for a slave. A master can set any price for their slave to pay. They can set an impossible price for their slave to pay, and they have to pay that price to attain their freedom. Are you fucking kidding me? How is that a plus point in your corner? It is not. It is ridiculous that I think you get the point. The final thing that I wanted to address before I get into the sources about slavery, is that someone, and this was someone other than Zaim, had said that Islam gradually stopped slavery. Islam stopped a lot of things immediately and gradually. Islam stopped a lot of things. Islam stopped people from drinking. Islam stopped people from eating donkey's meat. Islam stopped people from eating pig's meat. Islam stopped people from owning, dogs, except for hunting and protection. Islam stopped a lot of things. If Islam wanted to abolish slavery immediately, it could have, and it didn't. So don't go around telling me that Islam stopped slavery gradually, because it didn't. Slavery is still something that many muftis say is allowed to this day. Zaim is not a mufti. Zaim is not someone knowledgeable enough to make the claim that slavery is no longer moral. There are many muftis that still believe, muftis who have studied Islam, dedicated their lives to the study of Islam, who still believe that slavery is fine. So, if Islam can so outright make, pork haram instantly, just like that, a lot of Muslims will say, oh, when alcohol was prohibited in Islam, like the streets of Medina were flowing with alcohol. If people can so immediately stop doing things like drinking alcohol in the name of Islam, why wasn't slavery abolished in the same way? Why was that not done? Explain that to me. We're going to get into the sources now. And like I said, I normally don't bring up sources because I personally feel like it is a waste of my time when people aren't going to listen to what I have to say, even though I have provided sources. But because I'm so enraged by this argument, I want to bring up some sources, and I will not be quoting them fully because, let's be real, they're fucking long. And I have picked out some sources, and I'll be honest, it was a simple Google search that I did for this. But I've picked up some sources from the Quran, the Sahih Sitta, which are the 6 reputable books of hadith for Muslims, Sunni Muslims at least. And, a couple of these things are meant to be a couple of examples. The first thing I want to bring up is that Muhammad had a slave girl with whom he had a child. The child's name was Ibrahim, to the best of my knowledge. This is what what I remember studying. He had a slave by the name of Maria the Copt, right? And he had a child with that slave, providing the example that Muslims can have sex with their slaves and also have children with their slaves. The Quran verse that I want to cite is 4:24, in which the verse states that slave women who are married can be raped. And I use the word raped in the context that slaves do not have the agency to make decisions, and therefore a slave cannot give consent in order to have sex with someone. You can't procure consent from someone who has no options, who has to obey you. So it is rape. It is 100% rape. And that verse clearly states that those whom your right hands possess, even if they are married, you can fuck them. Like, you can have sex with them. The other sources from Sahih Bukhari 52-55, it says that Muslim slaves who obey their Muslim master receive double the reward in paradise for obeying their Muslim master, which implies that you can still even have Muslim slaves, right? From Bukhari 41-598, slaves are property. They can be used to pay an outstanding debt, and that slave cannot be freed if the master of that slave has a debt to pay. So he can only use that slave in order to pay that debt. Like, he can't free that slave cannot be freed if he has a debt to pay. In Bukhari 62-137, women were raped under Muhammad's approval after an invasion. I can't remember which invasion it was, but after his people had invaded a land, women were raped under his approval, and people were asking him about coitus interruptus. And a similar hadith is also in Bukhari 34-432, where people were asking about coitus interruptus because they didn't want to get their female slaves pregnant and thereby lowering the value of that female slave should they want to sell her on. In Sahih Bukhari 47-765, Muhammad tells a woman she would have gotten a greater heavenly reward for giving her slave girl to an uncle or a relative instead of freeing that slave. So instead of freeing that slave, it would have been more beneficial for her in the eyes of God in paradise, for her heavenly reward, for her to give her slave girl to someone else. I can't. It's making me so angry. In Sahih Muslim 4112, a man frees 6 slaves on his deathbed. He frees 6 slaves, I'm assuming in his will or on his deathbed, and Muhammad reverses the emancipation and keeps 4 of those slaves for himself. In Abu Dawood, which is also among the Sahih Sitta, Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari, both of those books of hadith are considered completely sahih, completely authentic. Abu Dawood has some good narrations, some sahih narrations, and others that may not be as acceptable, but it's still among the Sahih Sitta, which is among the 6 reputable books of hadith for Sunni Muslims. In Abu Dawood, Abu Bakr beats his slave in front of Muhammad, and this is 1814 in Abu Dawood. He beats his slave in front of Muhammad for losing a camel, and Muhammad is just kind of smiling about it. In Abu Dawud 38-4458, a slave girl is beaten until bloody by Ali, who is the 4th caliphate. Abu Bakr was also the 1st caliphate, and his slave girl is beaten bloody for fornication. I'm assuming for disobeying, and this is a slave girl. There's no implication that this girl is Muslim or not, but she is beaten bloody by Ali for fornication. And the Prophet actually tells him to apply that punishment. The next one and the last one I'm going to state, because it's as much as I can fucking take today, is from Sunan Abu Dawud 1142, where Muhammad tells one of his Sahabis, "Don't beat your wife as you beat your slave girl," implying that it was okay to beat your slave girl. So Though that is my little rant about slavery, I hope it is clear that slavery has never been okay. It will never be okay. I don't care what your religion says. It has never been okay. It will never be okay. And slaves did not have special privileges as, under Muslim rule, very clearly, because in the time of the Prophet, these things were going on. I will look back in the chat to see what was said. I know I made some very heartfelt comments about Omar up in the chat, but thank fuck he's gone. Where is it permissible in Islam? From Patan Dude, where is it permissible in Islam to allow slavery? Islam allows slave. The Prophet himself had slaves. Sahabas had slaves. If you are not aware of this, please do look into it. It is known. It is completely known that the Prophet himself had slaves. I'm just looking in the chat. When you say Arabia, is that before or after Islam came? Before Islam, slaves existed, and after Islam, slaves continued to exist. Yeah, Patan Dude, that guy really does need to experience slavery in order to understand, because he's under the impression that slavery is just domestic work. I don't think he fully understands what slavery is. Otherwise, he wouldn't be saying these things. And if he does fully understand what slavery is and still making these stupid arguments, I don't even want to know. In terms of the Quran sources, there are a couple of other Quran sources aside from the one that I quoted, or not even really quoted, the one that I pointed out. Please do look into it. It is really important. The reason that I don't normally provide sources is because I am of the understanding that at the end of the day, you'll believe whatever you want to believe. Even if you remain a Muslim and you decide that slavery is wrong, good for you. I'm glad. But I feel like it's really, really important for you to do your own research, look into slavery, and also try to have a balanced perspective of it. You go to Islamic sites, people will say that, Islam did the best thing for slavery at the time. You go to non-Islamic sites and you'll find a completely different story. So please do your research. Please look into the Quran. I would advise you to do that. Don't take my word for it. I'm one person talking on the internet. I would advise that you go and do your own research. So please do that. I fully advocate for you to, distrust what I say. If that's where you are, if you distrust what I say, stick with that, go do your own research, figure it out for yourself. Okay, that's fine. No, I fully understand that there are Muslims out there who reject the hadith because, and please do revisit those verses, because the hadith as a historical source, they were collected much, much later, and I fully get Muslims who reject that, but you can't deny that the hadiths are, authentic sources for most Muslims, like 80% of Muslims. And I know that doesn't necessarily apply to you, but that it's still a very significant source to hold on to, and it's really the only way of understanding the way that the Prophet lived at the time. And so that's the only way you can really imitate him, is through the hadith. And I'm all for you going ahead and picking and choosing the good things from Islam and then leaving all the bad things. That's kind of what I've done, even though I don't consider myself a Muslim. But there is no denying that the hadiths are so, important to Sunni Muslims as well as some Shia Muslims. What am I doing for 500 subscribers? I haven't fully decided yet, but I might be reading hate comments with a friend. We're going to get drunk. It'll be fun. It'll be fun. And if you guys have any other questions, please do let me know. Oh, thank you. It's nice to have a nice discussion with a Muslim, because most of the time I'm just cursed out. But please do let me know if you have any other questions. I would love to answer them in like the next 20 odd minutes. Please do feel free to link people to the stream if you think that they could provide some insight. I'm more or less done with this live stream. But yeah, I just needed to get that off my chest because it was making me so angry that someone could validate slavery in this way. And if Patan dude, if you are on Twitter, I would advise you to come have a dialogue with this person because they are not letting up. After making all these points, both on Twitter and now on a live stream, they are still defending slavery. So if you have a Twitter, please feel free to engage with Zaim. You know, he's very confusing, is all I'm gonna say. So yeah. I don't want to talk about ISIS. I really don't want to talk about ISIS. They're a terrible, terrible thing. But even though things like ISIS exist, I think it's really, really important to appreciate the movement of Muslims who want to change and want to accept things like slavery being wrong. Like I think it's really important to acknowledge the struggle there because those are the Muslims who are going to make the real changes. Even if it's not in Islam that they'll make the changes, it is in the attitudes of other Muslims that they'll make those changes. So I think it's really important to highlight that. This is true. Not all Muslims are ISIS. Sorry, Andrew. You can go back and listen to it all. You would be, Patan dude, you would be really surprised with what ISIS adheres to. There are some points where they kind of go a little off the rail, but ISIS are essentially literalists of the hadith. They're a little crazy, but they're also literalists. I would advise you to check out Apostate Prophet's videos. He makes Masked Arabs videos. He made an entire compilation of ISIS and how what they're doing is not completely against Islam. So I would advise you to go look at that if you wanted some more information on that. But I appreciate that you don't want to be like that. You don't want to be a literalist who, wants to wage war and dominate the entire world. I've always said that I'm not against people who have religion. Some people might wildly disagree with me for that. My mother was religious. My mother passed away from cancer, and religion was one of those things that really, really, made her feel good. So, and I would never dream of taking that away from her. I feel like if that white lie, which is, in my opinion, it's a lie, if that white lie gave her that comfort, I would never dream of taking that away. So as long as you practice your religion and you're not, forcing it down someone else's throat and validating things like slavery, I'm fine with it. If it's a personal thing between you and your God, that is what I'm fine with that. And I will always fight in your corner for you to have that right. So, yeah. Wouldn't Muslim reformers have to police what parts of religious texts that others believe in? If so, why wouldn't it lead to returning to the roots like Wahhabism? The thing with Muslim reformers, there are different grades. There are loads of sects of Muslims. There are Quranists, there are Sufis, there are Shias, there are so many different types of Shias, so many different types of Sunnis, so many, there are Ahmadis. I don't know how they're going to go about it. It's really not within my field to reform Islam. People like Majid Nawaz, for example, they are calling Muslims up on things like wife beating and why people think that it's okay or why people apologize for it. But I think that we at least have to appreciate the steps that people are taking. Ed, you okay?
Yeah.
You don't have to crawl on the floor. You can appear on my stream. People have seen you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea is a fake. I was wondering, what am I doing?
Sorry to hear about your mom. My mom also died from cancer, and the build up to her death, being around religious people, was horrible. Yeah, it was one of the worst things that had happened with my mom. was that she was constantly surrounded by people who kept telling her to pray and to be more religious, when, in my opinion, she should have just experienced the last few months of her life, which, you know, I would have advocated for, but I couldn't at the time. People are commenting saying that you're hilarious. Yeah. Because you were crawling on the floor.
Yeah, no shit. Because I don't follow my friend. But seriously, do you want this one?
Yeah, that looks great. Andrew, one of the commenters, has said we know you normally make him crawl on the floor.
Wouldn't he like to know? Shall I show him my collar?
Your collar. If you guys have no other questions, I might just end the stream. It's been 40 minutes, which is, let's be real, a normal length for one of my videos. But I'll give it maybe like 5 more minutes so you guys can get the last few questions in. His name is Ed, actually, not Andrew. I am against slavery. I don't know why he was crawling on the floor. You knew I was live streaming. Did you think that people wouldn't see you if you crawled?
I didn't know you were situated fucking here.
Well, where else would I be sitting?
Over there.
No, there's too much light over there. I'm gonna look like an angel. You know how I always sit in your room and your covers are white, so it bounces all the light off everything? Exactly. I'm gonna look like I'm in paradise.
You're a literal dick. Anyway,
so Jaren's just asked, can free speech eventually kill Islam? I don't know. Ideas, I've always said that ideas are very, very difficult to destroy. I think even in a small way, Islam will always exist. I think that we should encourage free speech, even if it is free speech to, a very small degree. And Patan, dude, maybe in your understanding of Islam, free speech is already there, but blasphemy and things like apostasy are very hot topics right now for free speech in Islam, which is what we would be talking about. And the criticism against free speech is always about offense and people being feeling attacked because Islam is, under fire or whatever. I don't think Islam will ever be killed as an idea. I think Islam will always exist as an idea. I don't know if it will completely go away. I have my doubts about that, but only time can tell with that. I'm so excited for food, and I'm so excited that I'm not angry about that fucking slavery thing because it was driving me crazy. Can we not just keep talking about ISIS? Because as far as I'm aware, ISIS has been destroyed. It was driving me so crazy that guy kept talking about slavery. ISIS will not dominate. I think most people are sane enough to understand that ISIS won't dominate. Thank you, Jaren. Thank you, Patan Dude. Thank you for all our equality for humanity. Thank you, Omar, even though you were so fucking rude in the beginning. Thank you, Selsuk. I think that's how you pronounce your name. Selsuk Dildek. Thank you, Arabia Tube. I don't know why your messages are hidden. But thank you for coming onto the live stream. Thank you, Andrew, for coming onto the live stream. I hope to see you next time. Really didn't expect to do a live stream, but I'm glad I did, and I'm so much happier, and I'm gonna go have some food. I hope you all have a great day, night, evening, whatever. And don't support slavery because it's a terrible thing. A terrible, terrible thing. And I can't believe I've had to do a video about that, like do a live stream about slavery. But I'm gonna head off now. So thank you guys for coming and watching me. If you guys have any other questions, please do leave your comments after I close the stream. And feel free to share if you want to, or if you have friends who believe in slavery for whatever reason. Although I don't know why they would be your friends. but I'm going to go off. So thank you and goodbye.